It has just struck me as how much of a society we are instead of an order. Usually at these events, our able executive secretary or director will present me with a bio of the people who are going to speak tonight. We all know each other so well, nobody did that. And Susan, I didn't think to write anything about that. So Susan Klutz is going to speak here for our honoree, Kevin Cherry, in just a moment. She is a remarkable person. If you go to the town of Salisbury, you will find out just how remarkable she is, because as mayor of Salisbury, she did an incredible job. She did it so well, she had to turn it over to somebody she knew. She's got a very good following there, and it continued on until someone recognized her abilities and said, I would like you to come to Raleigh and help me with a few things I've got on my agenda. And that was the governor. And so she was selected and came and was the secretary of then Cultural Resources. Not satisfied with being Secretary of Cultural Resources, she decided to make herself Secretary of Natural and Cultural Resources and co-opt the state parks into that. In that process, because of this room, she, and engaging with a network of friends, launched an incredible campaign to save our historic tax credits in North Carolina. And that was no small task, given the political climate and the legislature at the time and the general attitudes of things. She had some help. Some of the folks who helped her are in this room here with us tonight, almost sitting at the same table, but not quite. And so she has done that. She is now a retired public figure, but she is on the road constantly. She has shown up recently and given her opinions on our ideas of what we're going to do with rail in North Carolina, and added great input to that because she has an understanding of how we can move people around in North Carolina in an efficient and economical way to add to our largesse of the coffers and to our cultural benefit. She also has a most incredible family of some of the most darling grandchildren you have ever seen. And she has pried herself away from grandmother duty tonight to come here to speak. Susan Klutz.
Well, to say that I am thrilled about tonight would be an understatement. There is no one I know that should be recognized for his contributions to North Carolina and its history more than Kevin Cherry. And I would know. We worked together closely for a full 4 years. His knowledge combined with his humor, his disposition, and his love of people made working with him a joy for me. I even experienced how he filled his spare time with volunteer work at many of our historic sites, including dressing up and serving as the conductor on the Polar Express at the Transportation Museum. You never knew where you would find Kevin and what he would be wearing. But I came to Raleigh in 2012 with no experience in state government, other than my trips to lobby for my city as the mayor of Salisbury for 14 years. But one experience I did have in Salisbury was that I had the opportunity to meet Kevin when he worked there for several years as the local history librarian. And I learned about his excellent reputation there and the tremendous respect that people in Salisbury had for him. I knew he was someone I could trust. Well, I had a unique perspective when I was appointed Secretary of Cultural Resources by Governor McCrory. I was the only Democrat in his cabinet. coming from 14 years in a nonpartisan office and working with Mayor McCrory in the Nonpartisan Metropolitan Mayors Coalition. I believed in bipartisanship, and I believed that cultural resources was very important to this state. So, as I put my management team together, I looked for the very best professionals to do the job. I did have an amazing number of applicants. A website called workforpat.com had collected 8,000 resumes of people, mostly Republicans, who felt like they had a chance to be in Raleigh. So I was able, in the several weeks before I was sworn in, to put together an outstanding team, including Karen Cochran, who is here. Actually, she was then professor here at UNC Business School, is back there now as Chief Deputy Secretary. Carrie Cox of Cox Marketing Group in Charlotte as Marketing and Public Information Director. But I never considered replacing Kevin, who at the time was already in the job of Deputy Secretary for History, Archives, and Libraries. It was obvious from my first conversation with him that there was no better person for the job. Having an excellent team was important, especially at a critical time in state government, particularly for cultural resources. Not many people know the full story about this, but you're going to hear it tonight. I was about to learn how critical it was. When I arrived, it was the end of 2012, and the state had suffered greatly, as you know, following the recession. When I was appointed, my hometown newspaper described the department that I was now leading as, quote, critically underfunded. She will lead a critically underfunded department. Well, that was another understatement. The department had been warned right before I arrived that its three largest historic sites, Tryon Palace, the Transportation Museum, and Roanoke Island Festival Park, if they did not produce revenue in the next year, they may close. Kevin agreed, in addition to his duties supervising history, archives, and libraries, to serve as interim director of all three at the same time. He never, in the 4 years I was with him, refused to do more work. We also realized that because of inadequate funding, there was no way the department could operate as it had without making serious cuts. Our funding was so low at that point, the only way to survive was to temporarily close 4 historic sites and a history museum. Well, Kevin was devastated. No one loved those sites more than he. But we had no choice. And it got worse. This was only the first month that I was there. Well, I was shocked to be told by a leader in the state Senate that he planned to, quote, shut down the department. State government should not fund cultural resources, in his opinion. Well, no matter how alarmed I became, Kevin remained a rock. He calmly faced all challenges and proved to be tremendously supportive of all the staff, especially in his areas of history, archives, and libraries. His work and devotion to them never wavered. Kevin took the news well when I explained that our management team would be traveling to the 4 historic sites and the 1 history museum to break the news to people in person. Someone on the staff said at the time, "We don't do that in state government. We don't go out and do that." Well, we do, and we did. But I knew this would be particularly painful for Kevin, but we had no choice. The staff and volunteers needed to hear the news from us, and they needed to hear the explanation of why there was no money. Well, we drove up to our first site, Polk birthplace near Charlotte. We were surprised when we did. We were in a white van with darkened windows, so nobody could see who was driving up. But they knew it was somebody bad. Well, there were protesters lining the sidewalk, and they looked at us with these angry faces, trying to figure out who are these bad people closing our site. And they held up signs that said, "Don't close our site." Well, what I didn't tell you is there were third graders. Well, I knew it must be heartbreaking to Kevin to get off of that van and be the bad person like it was to me. I knew it would be heartbreaking to him because it was to me. But similarly, we were greeted at Vance near Asheville. This time, the protesters lining the road to the site were Tar Heel Junior historians, poor Kevin, one of his favorite groups. So I knew this was going to be really difficult for him, but he did say later it was his most proud moment, seeing these young people so passionate about history, that made him happy. Well, our tour continued next at Aycock near Wilson, where again we encountered protesters. But this time they weren't students, they were senior citizens. And they were led by Betty Ray McCain. Well, we finished our trip to the house in the Horseshoe in Sanford and the Mountain Gate Museum in Old Fort. The publicity that this gained was just incredible all over the state. And the publicity, in addition to the many letters that the legislators received from third graders, from junior Tar Heel historians, and from senior citizens, had a surprising and unexpected result. The legislators found the money. No site closed, and no mention of closing any part of our department was made again in the entire 4 years. But our crisis didn't end there. The second year, we watched helplessly as the state historic tax credits reached their sunset date the end of 2014. We were unable to convince the legislators to extend them. Well, we had learned much from our historic site visits. So, with the blessing of Governor McCrory, who had been, of course, a mayor and understood what historic tax credits could do for a city, we began a community rally tour at the beginning of 2015, celebrating what mayors in the cities chose as their most successful historic preservation projects, and also to show us buildings that had potential and needed them. Kevin knew many people in the different cities and towns, who was related to whom, who didn't speak to whom, and even once in a while, information on the sites. Well, this tour continued for 10 months while the legislators would not make a decision. At Easter, the House passed it. The Senate wouldn't hear it. Well, it continued for 10 months and included 52 different cities and towns and rallies in each one of those. Well, in October, I'm proud to say the tax credits returned and the governor signed the bill. Finally, today, I'm also proud to tell you that the sunset has ended. There is no sunset, and it is permanent. We have them. Throughout our 4 years, Kevin always expressed concern over a part of North Carolina history that had not been adequately told. It was the African American story. He worked with his staff on 2 different projects. One was a monument to be placed on the southeast corner of the Capitol grounds, recognizing contributions by African Americans to the state. We traveled to seven different sites around the city to hold public hearings about what should be included and heard 14 hours of comments. Sadly, the project never happened after we left, when several years later, other monuments came down and were removed and no more went up. But the second project, I'm happy to say, to turn the property behind the Cultural Resources Building into the Freedom Park was successful. And today, the glorious park honors and celebrates our African American population and their struggles for freedom. Kevin loved his work, nothing more than a celebration. He would celebrate anything, and we celebrated all the time. Well, if you had something to celebrate, he was your man. So one year at the last minute, the governor decided he wanted to have a flag ceremony for the 4th of July. Well, Kevin was thrilled. Kevin said, "I will do it," volunteered. This is great. So proud of him. Well, he was so excited to put it, he began putting the agenda together. There was one part of it that I wasn't too sure about. That was, he wanted one of the speakers to be my 5-year-old grandson, William. Well, I wasn't sure that a young child should be part of this distinguished ceremony, standing on the Capitol steps, including the governor, but Kevin insisted. So little William, little 5-year-old, he is dressed in a coat and bow tie. He looked like little miniature Kevin. Was standing in between us, in between Kevin and me, and Kevin got up and gave him the most flowery introduction about where he had just recently graduated from kindergarten and where he was going to be starting the first grade, and he just made him sound so important. And so, anyway, when he finished, Kevin turned to me and whispered, and he said, "Bubbles," that's my grandmother's name. He said, "Bubbles, I can't remember it." And I'm like, oh my. So I panic. Kevin, of course, is so calm, and he just leans over and says, "William, just turn around backwards, face the flag with your back to the audience, and I will help you remember it," which he did. So nobody knew that he did not remember the Pledge of Allegiance. Well, that was Kevin, always calm in a crisis and always finding a solution. Well, I could go on with so many more stories and examples of what Kevin accomplished during those years. His work and influence were immeasurable. In closing, I can tell you that no one ever loved the state of North Carolina and its people more or worked harder to make it the very best. North Carolina is a better place today because of Kevin Cherry. Congratulations, Kevin.
I am Patrick Wooten. I am the Secretary-Treasurer of the North Caroliniana Society. I am also a co-conspirator in many things that Kevin has done over the years. Sometimes driver, sometimes advisor, mostly a listening post. On the first day of Drama 16, which always seemed to have a disproportionate number of oversized football players lining the aisles due to them not being able to wedge themselves into the petite seating of Playmakers or Smith Hall, Professor Art Hausman would begin by rhetorically asking the question, "Where do we begin?" He would then answer, "We begin at the beginning." Dr. Thomas Kevin B. Cherry. The B does not stand for Buster. After having given great attention and deliberation to determining into which suitable Scots-Irish family he would be born, turned his attention to his early pedagogy. Everyone takes it for granted that Kevin, the son of a teacher and high school principal, excelled through grade school and high school. Apparently, even Dr. Cherry does, because it is one of the few things he's never talked about. And as he would say, and y'all, that's a mighty short list. He grew up on a tomato farm. Everyone knows that. But you might not know that Kevin was involved in 4-H, animal husbandry at that. Now, some folks involved in the 4-H and pursuits such as that think that it's only natural that their calf or cow will go to the state fair. Kevin's went to the abattoir. What Kevin did excel at was being a Tar Heel Junior historian. No surprise there. Kevin fell hook, line, and sinker for all the dates, the people, the places, the events, and most of all, the stories. Born with an almost unlimited data reserve for such things, it became second nature to him. Kevin can walk through an historic site with a distracted gaze in his eyes and then recall when the place is mentioned in conversation decades later. Oh, that's the Viking revival bed and dresser in the southeast bedroom that the major brought his wife from Tiffany's. It's made of narwhal tusk. But the main attraction in the room is the power switch behind the door. You know how they made their money, don't you? There are others who have the same keen reserve of knowledge. Some are professional historians, others share in the general interest. What makes Kevin's path to later life interesting is how it began in the beginning. In studying all those places and events and people, he figured out at some point that he was kin to some of them. We've never been safe since. Tonight is a little different because we have Kevin's parents, sisters, and cousins actually in the room with him. For many in this room, you are as fictional as Mr. Snuffleupagus was to everyone on Sesame Street, except for Big Bird. As told by Kevin, even Faulkner would have a hard time finding your stories to be imaginable. Stories from camp meeting, choir practice, the tomato fields, football games, baseball games, basketball games, lots and lots of basketball games. Motorsports, horses, mules, tractors, gullies, World War II basement showers, tanning beds, guinea stew, and so on and so forth have been retold in the halls of the Dialectic Society and in the halls of Congress. All of them ending, and y'all, that's the truth. They are the foundations of what brings us to this occasion tonight to honor Kevin Cherry. When Kevin arrived in Chapel Hill for his first degree, he and everyone else knew that that would not be the last. That was because if you're going to be a doctor, you have to go to medical school. Hence, at least 2 degrees were in his future. Kevin was going to be a doctor, period, no doubt about it. He was studying chemistry. He was working as a cardiac tech at Memorial Hospital. Yeah, those are some good stories, but we just ate. Heading to class one day, Kevin had a Damascus Road experience, but with just regular sunlight, and not everybody around him fell down. Kevin realized that he did not want to be a doctor. Many were dismayed and some were disappointed, but in the end, it was probably for the best. You will recall what happened to the calf. No, Kevin was to be a thinker. He began to turn to more philosophical pursuits. Eager to share his enlightenment with a group of fellow Di-Fi students, Kevin offered up the imponderable query, y'all, why can't everybody just think like me? The response to this profoundness seems to have turned Kevin to a path of more applied and practical theory. After chemistry as an undergraduate, Kevin obtained a master's degree in the history of science, and then a master's and PhD in library and information science. That's 4 degrees for those of you keeping score. He blames the German language for the lack of a 5th. Along the way, he taught in universities in Maryland and in North Carolina. He developed a statewide online system to link the holdings of all the little museums and libraries with the holdings of the big institutions. And this was in the days before you could whip out your phone and video conference with your children on a different continent. After helping award federal grants, large and small, to museums and libraries across the country, Kevin made it back to North Carolina to help shepherd a group of institutions that had inspired him since childhood. Kevin knew instinctively that he was not the only one who had family stories, not the only one who told those stories, not the only one who ventured out on the weekends to see what's over there, or decide to stop in a place because we've driven by here for years and always wondered what this place was. If there's a talent that Kevin has that is not widely shared in the population, it is that he can look at the biggest pile of broken down, overgrown, vermin-infested, out-of-the-way junk or building and say, y'all, we could put a gift shop over there. No man has ever loved a gift shop more than Kevin. Not that he wants to buy a lot, he wants you to buy a lot. Kevin rarely talks poorly of museums or historic sites that he visits. Sometimes you might get a, well, they're doing the best they know how. But rarely ever anything truly harsh, except when he says, it's a shame they're not going to make it. When asked why he believes that, he will shake his head and slowly look up. He said, did you see where they put the gift shop? With apologies to another Kevin, build it and they shall spend. By the way, as an aside, did you notice that Kevin, he might have lifted his hand right there, he wants to tell you a Moonlight Graham story so bad he can't hardly stand it. Kevin, however, knows that before you send them out through the gift shop, you have to send them away not only happy, but wanting to come back and bring their friends and family. Did you have a good time? What was your favorite thing today? Have you ever been here before? How'd you hear about this place? At any historic site or organization he's been involved in, Kevin is a walking Gallup poll of what's working and what needs improving. Kevin sees room for improvement everywhere. Y'all, if we just widen that building over there by about 10 feet, we could put 4 doors in it, open out on this parking lot, and rent it for weddings when we aren't using it for workshops, demonstrations, or seminars. Just think how many more school kids we could fit in here out of the rain. It won't cost much, but it always does cost. Kevin knows that. If you want to get money out of someone for a project, what do? Make it personal. If your family has ever so much as ridden by the place going to the beach on vacation, Kevin will find out about it and remind you of it. And if your organization, if the grandparents worked for or belonged to the organization, then you might as well get out your checkbook or your lobbying tie. When potential donors do come to an event to see what glories will be wrought through their benevolence and generosity, they're not going to get a few faded copies of a brochure. Out come the artifacts, out come the white gloves, out comes the barbecue. Whether it's bringing in Golden Frank's Edenton home, waving and building Fort Dobbs with his hands in the air so folks can see how big and grand it was being going to be and has now become. Or cajoling Bland Simpson and Tom Earnhardt to launch a demonstration boat cruise to show that ecotourism on the Albemarle is not only commercially viable, but also lots of fun. Adding land to save the viewscapes at Bennett Place, Fort Dobbs, Alamance, and others. Pushing for more buildings to showcase, maintain, and grow the Transportation Museum's automotive and other holdings. Telling the story of a middle-class Raleigh student who was editor of the Daily Tar Heel and did really, really well in New York despite many challenges. Or corralling school children with legislators in tow to parade North Carolina's recouped copy of the Bill of Rights to the Capitol for a limited time only. Kevin believes in getting people excited about history, about where they're from, about acknowledgement of what was done right and what was done terribly wrong. about making new things from old materials, but leaving the underlying fabric recognizable. Telling the full story in the fullest possible way. Telling them in a way that will excite another Tar Heel junior historian or inspire another Junior Johnson or a junior ROTC cadet or the junior league or a junior ranger or a junior fireman or even a few little doctors and lawyers to be rather than to seem. But as he says, sometimes you need a bit of show to push the substance. Perhaps it's somewhat ironic that we come together tonight to honor a man who has picked this thread and that thread of history and woven them into some of our state's most visited and beloved places and adventures, when he's the same man who managed to lose a pair of trousers just by walking across a parking lot. While not the most organized, he is Mr. Organization. Kevin's commitment to each organization, to his state, to his university, his faith, his family, and his friends have been a benefit to all of them and will be in the ages to come. And y'all, that's the truth. And now our new president of the organization, Bland Simpson, will please come forward.
"'Tis not just I, but 'tis this moment in history that calls you, Kevin Cherry, to this stage. Please. Ladies and gentlemen, Kevin Cherry. Kevin, it is my distinct and signal honor to present you with the North Caroliniana Award for 2024. Congratulations.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. All right. Well, let's all sing "I'll Fly Away," go have some ham biscuits, and talk about the flowers. I'm truly honored by this recognition, especially since so many who've had such an impact on my own life have their names etched on the bottom of that silver cup. Mountains among us. I was truly lucky to be the assistant, flunky, and all-around gopher for so many of those people whose names are right there for many years. I got to be close to their huge accomplishments while I managed to pursue some of my own little projects. I have to admit that it does seem strange to be standing here and not be waiting to be volunteered to do something. Kevin, will you make sure these things make it back to Wilson? I'm sure if he could get a toll-free, long-distance line, Dr. Jones is listening in right now. And Mr. Powell, it seems, should be here telling me about something he discovered while he was looking up something else, and maybe you want to write about that someday. And John Sanders would certainly come up to me and say, "Come to my car, I have a book for you." Shoot, I even now work for an organization named for one of those people. So my thanks to those North Carolina greats, whether listed on that cup or not, who all seem to agree that I had some spare time on my hands. Few of us accomplish much alone. I know I haven't. If you have ever served on a committee, board, or something like it with me, if you ever worked on a project with me, if you ever wrote or edited something with me, always making me sound smarter than I am, if you ever took me to the legislature as as Secretary McCain said, we're going to march across that street, and we're going right in that building, and we are going to beg and whine. If you've ever done any of these things with me or anything else like these things, will you please stand up? Just stand up. Come on. Thank y'all for putting up with me. And of course, thank you to Mama and Daddy and my sisters Lana and Allison. I was a graduate student the first time I ever attended one of these annual meetings. Dr. Isaac Copeland, retired director of the Southern Historical Collection, asked me to come so I could help him with his wheelchair. I was more than happy to do so. When we entered the Carolina Inn that evening, I saw so many, as Bland calls them, statriots, men and women who, simply put, made North Carolina a better place. Y'all are still here and still doing that important work, I see. A few years later, before a society dinner, I ran down the hall to the euphemism and claimed a urinal. And believe it or not, in came Mr. Morton of Grandfather Mountain fame, and he stood alongside of me. And then a little bit later, Mr. Cecil of Biltmore came in, and he stood on the other side of me. And they started talking small talk past me. Well, that event, along with those names on that silver cup, sort of sums up my life. Thank y'all for allowing me these last few decades to piddle between the mountains. All right, Patrick, Terry, the officers of the society.
We're calling the officers of the society together and ask you to say with feeling with us the first stanza of the state toast.
Ready?
Ready?
You don't have to sing it this time.
No, I won't sing.
Just sing it.
Here's to the land, longleaf pine, the summer land where the sun doth shine. Where you grow strong and the strong grow great. Here's to down home, the old North State.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you all for being here. Thanks for celebrating Kevin Cherry. And here's to the land. Good night.